Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. My name is Alexandra Alvarado. I'm the Director of Education at the American Apartment Owners Association. I'll be your presenter today on this very important topic, which I decided to bring back again because there is so much to cover about tenant screening. And I think really it is more important than ever that we know how to screen our tenants. So we did make it available to all of you here on the call for free today. Even if you weren't members of the association, I hope you enjoy the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, just a moment. All right, let's get started. Hold on just a second here while I switch up my view. It looks like it is a little small here on the side, but there we go. So let's begin. The information provided in this webinar is not any legal advice. I'm providing the information for you just as consideration as best practices for housing providers and for educational purposes only. If you have questions about a specific resident or situation, always talk to your attorney first and follow your policies. If I say something that differs, only implement that change upon approval. So before I begin, yet again, I will be sending you the full recording tomorrow, actually, with the full PowerPoint slides as well. So you will be able to review all of this information on your own. Don't worry about it if you don't catch all of it. I'm going to go over a lot of information and we are going to have questions at the end. So please put your questions in the question box, not the chat, because it's going to be a little tough for me to get through all of the chat to see what you all are putting in there. All right, so let's start with where are we now? First, I want to start with how a credit score is calculated. Some of you may already know this, but I think it's a good review. This is in particular for the FICO score, and essentially it's showing you here the different percentages for each of the factors that go into a FICO. Now, of course, there are many other score models. There's Vantage Score, Resident Screening Score, but for the most part, they follow sort of a similar pattern here. You'll see that payment history is the most important, so meaning if they've had late payments or not. Also amounts owed, so how much debt they have. We're also looking at how long they've had a credit report for, how much new credit they've applied for, and also the mix of credit. So whether it's just credit cards or if you have a mix of other kinds of loans in there as well. So credit scores are actually on the rise. This is something that I found to be quite shocking. You would think in the middle of a pandemic that credit scores would have plummeted, but they did not. People with the lowest scores actually have seen the most improvement during the pandemic, but are they really better off? And that is what we're going to go over today, because I think a person's credit report and their credit score is important, and the credit score is important, but there are so many other pieces of the report and things that you should be looking for outside of the report as well that I think are maybe more accurate depictions of how the person is financially. And if we look at the average FICO score and how it has changed since 2020 to 2021, you'll see here that there was a 20-point change. That's the greatest change for people who had a 550 to 599 to start. And looks like the people who are already better off didn't really improve at all, but below that they did. However, as you know, people, didn't really have better finances. So what happened? How did this happen? What does this mean for tenant screening? So just a couple other points here. People are making payments on time. That's essentially the main thing that happened. We see that was 35% of the score. It makes sense here. We see on the right, it's all negative in terms of going down. So we have fewer missed payments, and they aren't applying for new lines of credit as often. We're seeing that as well. And they are paying down more debt and spending less. Now, why are they doing that? Well, part of it has to do with the CARES Act that helped to defer debt. We had stimulus checks, which helped people to pay down debt if they didn't necessarily need the money, or they might have just saved it. They've just been spending more conservatively because of the pandemic, not knowing really what's ahead, and more saving in general. and more education. Because there was so much hype about how credit scores might plummet, a lot of free education was provided to tenants, as well as a free credit report for them to see their own scores and determine how to act accordingly. What I want to do, though, is dive into the CARES Act briefly, just so you have an understanding of what that means for what you're looking at on a credit report, how it would have affected it, and is still affecting a credit report today. So the first thing is the CARES Act for agreements made between January 31st, 2020 and still ongoing. The law requires creditors to report any account that has a payment accommodation applied to it as current, meaning that if I was current as of January 31st, 2020, but then all of a sudden I couldn't pay, I could call my creditors and ask for a payment accommodation, meaning maybe a deferral or a payment plan. And the creditor, whether it's US Bank or my auto loan from Ford or Honda, they wouldn't have to put that on the credit report. In fact, they wouldn't be allowed to. So there's a lot of payment accommodations that may have been made that are simply not on a person's credit report. Student loans were one of those. So student loans were automatically actually put into deferment, even if the student did not ask for it. They had to opt out of the deferment. That deferment is going to end starting February 1st of 2022. We know student loans are a ginormous percentage of people's debt. And unfortunately, what that means is that those payments are going to start soon. So whereas they may have been able to afford your rental before, it's quite possible that a student loan payment may make that more difficult. For the person in here, Daniel, who put, is a FICO score and a credit score the same thing? A FICO score is a type of credit score. There are different types of score models. So that's why I mentioned that most of them follow similar percentages, but there's also the Vantage score. There's the resident screening score model and several others actually. So when we say credit score, we're really talking about really most credit scores, and the most common one that's used in the housing industry is the FICO. Or the Vantage score for residents as well. So now let's go over what is and what is not on a credit report, because I think that's important to understand as well. It's very important that you know what you are getting when you're ordering a credit report, so that you know what to look for, and you know what you're not getting, so you know what to search for outside of the credit report. These may surprise you. Income, is it on a credit report? Never. You're never going to see somebody's for sure income exactly to the penny. In fact, you probably won't see anything at all. There are some new sort of products that are coming out, but they are estimates. It's not exact. It's not based on paycheck stub or direct deposit or anything like that. Employer is sometimes on there, although the credit bureaus, all three of them, they don't guarantee that it is current. A lot of times you'll see an old employer on someone's credit report. So you still have to verify that that person works there. Utilities are rarely on there unless it's for a collection maybe. So if they stop paying their utilities, you may find that out by looking at the collections on the credit report. Monthly rent, also very rare. So you may have heard there are some new services that do allow you to report monthly rent now. But for a very long time, it was very limited and exclusive to the largest property management companies in the country. So you're going to rarely see that on the credit report. And that, in fact, is probably the largest amount of debt that a lot of tenants have right now. And it's not on a credit report. So it's no surprise that not paying their rent didn't really have an effect on their credit score. Evictions, likewise, are never on a credit report either. So this is something that happened in 2017, actually, where evictions were almost entirely removed from a credit report. Now I'll talk about collections and how that can show potential judgment, but the eviction itself is not on the credit report any longer as a public record. Civil judgments, which are other kind of lawsuits, not just evictions, also are not on the credit report. Tax liens, federal or state, are also not on the credit report anymore. And these three really came from the 2017 National Consumer Assistance Program that was started by the three credit bureaus together to essentially eliminate some of these public records, which they did not feel were accurate enough. And of course, we talked about the CARES Act. Those loan deferrals are also not going to be shown on the credit report. Let's continue on with a few others. Recurring debt. So recurring debt would be if you have a credit card where you can basically accrue more debt every month up to a certain limit. That is always going to be on a credit report. Collections, which is when you basically stop paying a bill and the company that you owe the money to uses a collection agency to help them collect it. That does get still reported on the credit report, thank goodness. Bankruptcies are usually, I would say almost always going to be on the credit report unless it's very recent. Then there might be some lag time on that. Late payments on any credit cards or loans are always going to be on the credit report. Installment debt, which would be like an auto loan, where you have a certain amount of money that you've taken out and you have to make monthly payments until you pay it off, or mortgage, for example, that's always going to be on the credit report. The credit score, usually, right, if they have credit. Now, sometimes we might see a person who just started their credit report. It may actually show a credit card, but they don't have a score yet. They need to have it for at least 6 months. So in most cases, you're going to see a credit score if they have credit history, but not always. You also have a check writing history. So do you write bad or bounce checks? That's not going to be on a credit report. Checking and savings balances, which in my opinion are very important. We'll go over that later. That's also not on a credit report. So it's no surprise that credit scores have been maintained or have gone up during the course of the pandemic. So now we're going to look at the credit report red flags. I saw somebody asking something about evictions. I am going to touch on that later because there is still a way to find out whether or not your tenant has been evicted. And now with the eviction moratoriums mostly ending, we'll be able to still find out that information, but in a different way, not through the credit report. So the credit report red flags, I'm going to go over many of them. It's going to also cover how to read the credit report, and throughout I'll be showing you where tenants might have some common scams that they try. So the first common scam is providing a fake credit report. Now, recently in New York, for example, there is a new law that allows tenants to provide a copy of their own credit report for rental applications. Now, I would not suggest accepting a copy of a credit report from any tenant, although in New York, you are supposed to. You can take the credit report and you can still run your own. So you can't charge the tenant for it, but you could still run the credit report. And I would highly suggest doing that if you're in New York. If you're not in New York, then I would say just skip it and say, thank you for providing it, but I am still going to run my own credit report. And the reason why is because it is way too easy to just change a little number in Microsoft Paint. Even you don't need to be advanced or Adobe, and just change the number, just change the score a little bit, or delete that bankruptcy or that collection that they don't want you to see, right? So it's very important to have it still from the source, even if it's out of your own pocket. All right, so what is a main red flag? First red flag I would say is high debt. What we're looking at on the credit report is usually, most importantly, in the credit summary. I'm going to go over all of these, but really the ones that you need to focus on here is the account balance and the total monthly payment. So just because someone has okay credit score does not necessarily mean that they can still afford to pay the rent you are charging. They may have a lot of debt that would make it very difficult for them to make ends meet. And a lot of landlords simply do not look at this factor. The most important thing you should do is use the credit summary to find out how much debt they have. That is one of the main reasons, the main purposes of a credit report. And right here, we see the total account balance. That is adding the mortgage, the revolving, and the installment amount. So these are all three different types of debt. It's giving you the total account balance here, and then the monthly payment, which is how much do they have to pay out of their pocket every month to stay current on all of those loans and credit card accounts that they have open. And so when you look at that, that should be a factor in considering whether or not the person can afford your rental. Here is another version of the credit report. So some of you on the call may see the other credit report version I just showed you if you're with AAOA. If you're with Tenant Alert, it looks a little bit more like this, and AAOA's is going to look like this soon as well, where I like this version just because it does put it into sort of categories. But no matter what screening report you're using, the debt is always going to be in there somewhere. So search for it. You'll see here, it's the total debt and the payment per month in the debt category. And then over here, it's showing you a breakdown of how many past due accounts they have and collections. So this just gives you a broad overview. Although I would say the main thing to take away from here is the debt summary. All right. So what are the different types of late payments that we see on a credit report most commonly? Of course, 30, 60, 90, sometimes 120 days or more past due. So these are in order of not so bad to pretty bad. Collections is then when it's gone past the 120 days usually, and the creditor will simply use a collection agency. Some of you on the call probably have used collection agencies to collect judgments, for example, from your tenants. That does definitely negatively affect the person's credit report. The profit and loss write-off or charge-off is one that I commonly get questions about. So that is similar to collection in that the person still hasn't paid, right? But rather than send them to collections, the company is either internally working on collecting it and they have written it off as a loss on the person's credit report. That is still money that they owe. So just because it's not a collection does not mean they are not liable for it. Number 6 here is repossession or foreclosure. So repossession of a car, foreclosure of a home, and then lastly, bankruptcy. And we'll talk about the different types of bankruptcy you might see on a credit report. All right, so here's another red flag that a lot of landlords miss, and that is negative trends. And now, when I say trends, I mean recent. So of course, if somebody has missed some payments in the past, and then you see that they recovered, that is much different than someone who very recently has stopped paying. Now, this screenshot is from last year, but let's say this was 2021, you would see here that, oh, wow, if you look at this bottom part here with the payment history in these colored boxes, you'll see that they haven't paid their bill since July. What does that say? That says that they're obviously struggling to make payments on this account, and that is a negative trend. They are trending downward versus if they had had late payments maybe in 2017 and then since then have been all green. The other thing that's important here is to note the past due amount. How much do they actually owe now? It just may be very high, and that means that could likely go to collections pretty soon, and that's a liability for them, right? And then the remark, which I've also highlighted here, is very important. The account was closed by the credit grantor. So what that means is at a certain point, right, the creditor is just going to stop letting them borrow more money, right? That just makes sense. That also can be an indicator of what has happened. Sometimes the remark will tell you maybe there was a dispute on the account. Maybe the credit card was stolen. So you definitely want to make sure you're looking at the remark to find out if there's more context. There isn't always a remark. It's really up to the creditor to provide a remark, but definitely look there. And make sure you're looking for those trends because their credit score might still look okay, but if they've recently had issues, that's a problem. All right, collections. So what do we want to look at on a collection account? First of all, we always want to look at the type of collection. There are many types of collections. Medical collections are one of the most common collections you'll see on a credit report. Unfortunately, a lot of people, they do get unexpectedly ill. They're not able to pay their medical bills. It does get posted on their credit report, although the credit bureaus no longer really, most credit score models will not really factor that into their score if it's medical. Now, what are the types that do matter? Well, obviously, credit cards are important, utilities, but I think the most important one are apartment buildings. So you might see a property management company or apartment building, always Google the creditor, find out who it is that they owe money to, because that's going to make a difference. I mean, sometimes a creditor may show as an apartment building, for example, and they maybe took them to court. they weren't able to collect a judgment, or maybe they just had them owe them, I don't know, security deposit because maybe they went over on damages or something like that. So it's very important to see the creditor and find out more there. How much was it? Is it an insignificant amount? I've seen as little as $20 on a collection, which is quite ridiculous. I don't know that that really matters much, but after it gets over a few $100s, it's important to look at that. When was it assigned? So when did the collection actually occur? The further back it was, the less it affects the credit score. And maybe there is a reason that happened in that time, but maybe if it wasn't recent, it's not that big of a deal. Also, was it paid or unpaid? So you will see here if the date was marked as paid. And if it was, then that shows that at least they had some responsibility to pay it. And in most cases, once they pay it, they can ask for it to be removed from their credit report, but that doesn't happen automatically always. So it's important to look there to see the current status. All right. Here is a profit and loss charge-off, which we talked about. So really, I mean, this doesn't look much different, right, than the other accounts. They all pretty much look the same. Again, no matter what screening report you're using, you're still going to get this information. It's just going to be formatted a little differently. The important part is to look at the remark, look at the past due amount, which is here $1,124. Again, this is negative. It still is something that they owe to the company. So it's important to take a look at that. Over on the left side, on the left column, if you see there, it shows you the credit limit, the high credit. That's not really relevant too much at this point, right? You know, it's a charge off, so it doesn't really matter too much. The recent balance is going to be the most important thing there for you to look at. All right, what does a repossession or reaffirmation of debt look like? So it's going to basically show you, again, in the remark, it'll also show you the account status and the type here, which is auto right above. That really is just showing you here an auto repossession. It shows you how much they were supposed to be paying per month, but didn't pay. And if you see here, the payment history shows UKN or unknown. That happens very commonly when there is a repossession where it sort of just wipes out all of the payment history before that. That is just a credit bureau policy. So if you see that, don't be confused or alarmed. It's just not going to show you exactly how many months they stopped paying, but you can sort of do the math, I guess, if you look at the past due amount and how much they owed and versus how much they had to pay per month, right? All right, so another red flag here is any warnings or mismatch of information, right? Common scam is impersonating someone. We see a lot, well, not a lot, but we have seen juniors and seniors sort of borrowing each other's credit reports. So make sure you're looking at the date of birth. I know that most credit bureaus will remove the year of the date of birth, making it a little tricky, or the last four of the social, but at least you have some data that you can cross-reference there. As long as most information is entered as matched, it matches the credit bureau's profile, they will produce a report. Because if you're thinking, oh, well, if the report came back, it must be this person's credit report. That's not always the case. It's certainly possible that the credit bureau could produce a report if most of it was correct. And they would note that in the AKAs section, right? They would show you if there was maybe an alternative spelling. So here we have Susan. Susan has a different last name. So that could be a maiden name, not a huge deal, but you may want to ask about that. Maybe run a separate report with that other name, not just Lee. So this is a good place to see that. Also, if you see other SSNs, you'll see that potentially there was a time where a different SSN had been used. It could be a typo very well, but it also could be a different social completely. So the best way to check that, I'll tell you later a little bit more about it, is to do a social security number verification. So that's really going to show you exactly what the social is for that particular person and the name that was associated when the social was issued, so that you know that you have the right person. All right, the next red flag we'll go through here real quick is bankruptcy. So a lot of you guys know this already, but Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13 is a little different. Chapter 7 wipes out all debt. So this won't really create much of an impediment to the person moving forward after 4 to 6 months. It's all the debt is pretty much cleared, except for, student loans, government taxes, child support, or alimony. But it does stay on the credit report for 10 years. Now, whatever your policy is on bankruptcies, it really just depends on, I think, how long ago it happened and what they've done since. So if they have recovered since then financially, you can see that could be something that you can think about when you are screening tenants who have bankruptcies. Chapter 13 is a little different because it doesn't wipe out all the debt, but it does help them to pay it back over time. So that allows them at least the ability to maintain some of their assets. And it does take 3 to 5 years usually to do that process, but it stays on the credit report for less time. So this type of bankruptcy actually would affect potentially how that person is paying rent per month because they still owe money, right? Versus the Chapter 7, they don't owe anything. So they're starting with a clean slate. Just something to consider when you're screening a tenant. All right, and there's more. So that was the basics of the credit report. And now I'm going to focus on what is the other stuff, right? We know all the things that aren't on a credit report now. So how do we find out, what those things are and how does that affect our tenant screening? All right. All right. So before we go, actually, I'm seeing a couple questions. So I'm going to check these out here. I see revolving balance on a credit report. Can you please explain? Yes. So revolving or recurring is the same thing. And that essentially means like a credit card, for example. So you are essentially you're essentially spending money on a credit card and you pay a minimum monthly payment on it. You can spend up to your max on your credit card if you want. The revolving balance is how much money you haven't paid off. So for the best credit scores, you would ideally want to pay off your monthly balance every month, but a lot of people don't. So that would be the revolving balance that you're going to see on people's credit reports. Also, Leo, on credit reports, there's an inquiry section with different types of inquiries. FAB. I can give you a guide on the different inquiries after this webinar. Inquiries are really just when somebody applies for the credit card or for a loan. It doesn't mean that they got approved, but just for applying, just the fact that they applied, it does get put on their credit report. And they also will deem your credit temporarily for a few months. So we did see that 10% at the beginning is about new lines of credit. So that could be a factor as well if you have too many inquiries on your credit report. Okay, do you believe in Credit Karma? Asked James. So Credit Karma actually uses a score model that is different than what most landlords and mortgage and housing providers will use. And so Credit Karma essentially gives you a credit report, but the score isn't very accurate. And a lot of tenants may feel like they have a higher score than they actually do. And then when the landlord goes to screen them and they might use maybe a FICO or a Vantage score, it might be lower because those score models are more strict. They are designed for housing. And so that could, cause some confusion. But, it does help tenants, I guess, have more access to their credit report. But it does also cause some confusion. All right, so I'm going to move forward and let's go over just the applicant interview because that's really where the screening process begins. And that is where you can start collecting information that you will need in the decision process. So first question here I like to put is, why are you moving? It's going to tell you a lot about the person's intentions. Obviously, what is your total monthly income? So that is going to determine whether they can afford rent. How many people will be living in the unit? It is very important that you screen all applicants, all people who will be living in the unit who are over the age of 18. So it's good to know. And can you afford the application fee and security deposit? Obviously, that is a deal breaker if they can't. So why waste anyone's time? It's good to get that out of the way and let them know up front how much that's going to cost. And can you provide references from previous and current employers and landlords? This shows them that you're serious, that you are going to verify the information that you're giving them so that you don't have to run into that scenario where maybe later you find out that what they told you wasn't true. That allows at least some opportunity for them to provide you with accurate information. And do you have any questions? Questions that they have really reveal quite a lot about what they might think about the rental process or about you. We'll talk about income to rent ratios in a moment. And I linked here a previous webinar that I did just on interviewing tenants that is much more detailed than this. So if you want, I'll put it in the follow-up email so you can review it if you do want to dive into it deeper. But I think these 6 questions are really good ones to start with. And I like having consistency. I think that's important. And I also think it's important to always take notes because it's so easy to forget what you said. And it's also important to know when you had that conversation as well. And it provides some sort of paper trail, right? In case of, worst case scenario, some sort of legal dispute. So it's always good to take notes and to document everything. So scam number 3 is providing fake references or info on the application. So we talked about that, right? One of the ways that we can combat that is to ask for those references and verify them. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a moment. All right, some more rental application practices, You want to charge a reasonable legal application fee. So make sure you check your state. New York recently changed their application fee to $20, so you cannot charge more than that. California is a little over 50, so you should be fine. And then there are some other states as well, but just make sure that it's reasonable or legal. Like I mentioned, include all occupants over the age of 18. Disclose your criteria. So we'll talk a little bit about how to create criteria that makes sense for your rental in a moment, but you want to tell them, what it is that you're looking for up front, so that they don't feel like they're wasting their time and they can sort of, disqualify themselves if they don't have the right criteria to apply, and it saves everyone time. And I also suggest reviewing applications as they are submitted. So like I said, just noting the date and time when you have these conversations is important. And when the applications come in, timestamp them. It really does allow for more equality and fairness in the process. It's not a legal requirement by any means, but it helps to keep things a little organized and fair. And again, note the date and time to do that. All right, so I'm going to check questions again real quick to see if anything else has popped up. Okay. All right. Daniel said a couple screens back, it showed retired. So sometimes an employer will show up as retired on a credit report. So just keep note of that. It just means they retired. What suggestions would you have for screening commercial tenants? So that's a great one. We actually have a business credit report. So if the company has debt, we would be able to find it and tell you how much debt, how often they pay their bills, just like we would on a person. You also may want to screen the actual individual as well if they are going to be signing something themselves. That makes sense, right? To just know what's going on with the business. And I'll show you, Rich, how to access that. It is a custom order, so you do have to call us to get it. There's a phone number here at the bottom of our PowerPoint. So if you call us, we can set it up for you, and it's about $50 for a business credit report, and it does take about a day to process. Okay, instead of interviewing, why not questions on the application form? Well, certainly applications do have a lot of those questions, right? But sometimes they might call you first, right? And they might want to know more about the rental unit. So it might be a good idea for you to start having those conversations over the phone. And of course, you should give them a rental application after that so that it documents what they've told you. But sometimes, like, for example, asking questions like, why are you moving? Or do you have any questions for me? Though you can kind of get a sense, I think, better for people's motives, and also, just getting to know them can psychologically help to reveal information that you may not get on a rental application necessarily. All right. Daniel asks, is a FICO score and a credit score the same thing? So again, a FICO score is a type of credit score. There are many types of credit scores. FICO score is very commonly used in the housing industry, but there are others as well. The tenant alert fee is $39.99. Can you not charge the full amount? I'm guessing, Jerry, you're in New York. That is correct. We can actually set up a New York specific package for you. That would be $20, and we can talk about that separately off the call, but we do have a special New York package so that you can do the 20, or if you want to pay out of pocket, you would have to pay 20 extra for that particular package. Okay. And let's see. If a family member is over 18 years old, do you take an app and run their credit as well as the parents? I would say yes, I would run a background check, but the credit report is really going to depend on whether or not they have credit history. So if they're that young, if they're 18, they may not have credit history, but it may be worth doing anyway so that you're screening everybody the same way. It's not discriminatory, although likely their credit report will not have much on it if they're only 18 years old. All right, let's move on. And we're going to talk a little bit about income verification, which, as we saw earlier, income is not on a credit report, which in my opinion is like the most important part, right? How much money are they making every month? Can they actually afford the rental? How do you find out about this? Well, unfortunately, it's not on the credit report, so you do have to do some homework. So let's start with what source of income means. Source of income means a lawful, verifiable income that's paid directly to a tenant or representative of a tenant. Now, this definition, by the way, it's California's definition, but there are other state laws that surround what income means in the rental process. Others don't say anything about it. I think this one is pretty good, though, to go off of just to be safe. It also can include local public assistance or housing subsidies, like vouchers, for example. So in California, you literally have to consider those as income. In other states, I would say I would too, just because it is technically income, right? In fact, it might be more consistent income if it's coming from a government subsidy. So it's definitely important to take into account the total amount of income. That means child support, alimony, retirement, different sorts of income that they may be getting, right? Not just what we might think of traditionally as employment. In states like California or Chicago, Illinois, if you were to decline someone because they didn't have employment, but they had a different type of income, then that would not be okay, right? So you do need to consider all kinds of income. However, notice it says verifiable, right? So it is still okay to verify it. If they tell you I'm getting paid this much for my retirement or alimony, you should ask for proof of that still, even if you're in California or Chicago, right? Because that is part of the income equation. So it's very important to, really verify any source of income. And specifically, if they are employed, one of the most common scams is providing fake paycheck stubs. It is just so common that I think it's still worth asking for the paycheck, but you should ask for other things in addition to it as well. For example, a bank statement from the last 30 to 90 days is going to tell you the amount and the entity of direct deposits. That should match the pay stub details. Most people aren't getting paid in cash. So for the most part, this should cover most types of employment. The amount paid out for rent should match. So something else you can see on the bank statement. Of course, you can check for a healthy savings and checking balance. Again, remember, something that's not on the credit report. Very important to see that, to see what kind of safety net they have. Tax returns and government issued ID is very important. So if you look at their tax returns, whether they are self-employed or they have an employer, you should be able to see there how much they made last year. That could be a good indicator of what they're making this coming year. And also the government issued ID to match all of the names everywhere on all of these different documents that you're asking from the applicant. And this was a question we got in the Q&A. How much income is enough? So the question was, it's a 3-to-1 income to rent ratio. That's like the most common one you may have heard. But I will say this, the price of rent is increasing at a very fast rate, right? Inflation is faster actually than what people are making and how much income they're getting. So just be aware of your area and the cost of living and also the cost of rent. You may see that maybe something closer to 2.5 might be actually better for your area, because otherwise you might screen out too many tenants and just have a very small applicant pool, which is okay. If you're looking to fill a vacancy faster though, you may want to maybe lower the income to rent ratio that you have in mind, and maybe consider instead the checking and savings balance, which in my opinion is very important as well. If they don't make as much money, but they don't spend as much and they have a lot saved, that says a lot, right? So you want to take a look at not just the income, but also, hopefully you're looking at how much they have saved as well. And then you can kind of create your own formula for what you feel comfortable with. And again, here, you also want to consider the debt and the savings and the cost of living. So we talked about earlier how to find debt on the credit report. If they make a lot of money, but they have really high student loans and credit card debt, they're going to be paying a lot of money out of pocket every month for that. And then even if they make a lot of money, they might not be left with very much at the end of the month. So you want to take a look at that as well. All right, so moving forward with income verification. So of course, calling, I know it seems like such a pain, but calling the employer is really, I think, one of the best ways to verify income. You can also look on LinkedIn or the Secretary of State to make sure that the company exists. Locate the employer's website and their main phone number or email. I would not just call the phone number that the tenant provides you. You never know, it might not be a real phone number for that actual company. So you want to look it up online, make sure you get the phone number there, and then ask for their HR department. Usually, if they have one, they'll be able to accommodate you with an income verification. Make sure you have a signed application with a release ready. So all of our applications have a release built in. So it does say that it's okay for you to call the employer and the tenant signs that. So make sure you have that on hand, because a lot of employers will ask for proof that the tenant has authorized the release of their information. And also just note that some companies, they won't disclose salary, and that's just maybe their policy. So just because you call doesn't mean they're going to tell you everything you want to know. But for the most part, they'll be able to at least verify that that person works there. So that in itself is pretty valuable. And sometimes they may charge an extra fee to access salary information, which by all means, I think is definitely worth it if it means it's coming from a legitimate source. Like, whew, I know how much money they make and it's been verified. That would be a weight lifted off my shoulders. So now let's talk about landlord verification. So a tip here, if it's a mom and pop landlord that they had previously, you can search public homeowner records in some places and see who owned the previous property. You can call the landlord and tell them, I'm interested in learning more about your rental. If they have just a really blank, I have no idea what you're talking about, clearly it's not the actual landlord. So it's a nice test to kind of see if they are really a landlord or if it's maybe a cell phone of a friend. Now, again, this is for the smaller operators, right, that you're checking. Large property management companies, usually they'll have somebody at the desk in the office, and you can look up those phone numbers as well, as I mentioned, if you want to call them directly and ask. And for the most part, they'll accommodate you. And in some cases, again, they will ask for a rental application so that they can see that it's been signed by the tenant. And it's also important that you ask the right questions once you get the landlord on the phone. Employment is easy, right? Do they work there? How long have they worked there? How much do they make, right? For the landlord, you can actually ask a lot more. And now the landlord may not answer all of your questions, right? I'm sure you all have been called at some point, maybe from, a landlord who is thinking of renting to one of your tenants that's moving out. And so it really is just going to depend on the landlord and what they're going to, say, but it doesn't hurt to ask. That's what I say. So let's look at some questions, and I'll provide you with this questionnaire as a separate handout so that if you wanted to use it, when you call, you could check off that you've marked all the questions. I find that to be helpful. These are questions that we actually ask on behalf of our members when our members want us to do a landlord verification for them. One is, did they make timely payments? Are there people living there other than those on the lease? Would you rent to this family or this person again? Are you related to them? Was the residence well maintained? What was the monthly rent amount? That's actually something surprising a lot of tenants may hide from you. If they weren't paying very much before, it could be a big increase. And that could be a little bit of a red flag to see if they could afford that sort of increase of monthly rent. Of course, did they have any problems with neighbors? How many people are in their household? So that goes back to verifying, how many applicants you've screened, and make sure that they're all on the lease, of course. So that's a good question. Did the tenant cause any damages? And I would say too, to add on to that, damages that maybe exceeded the security deposit if it was really bad. When did they live there? Make sure those dates line up with what the tenant told you. Are there or were there any pets? Of course, tenants love hiding their pets. So if you have a no pet policy, you'll want to know if they had one at the previous residence. Most likely they didn't get rid of the pet, since where they lived last. So that is an important question. Did you evict the tenant? Obviously, very important. This is important as well because sometimes, you might say, well, I might find out on an eviction report that the person was evicted. But what if it just happened? It might not actually be on record yet. So it's good to see that the landlord, may have evicted the tenant very recently by asking them. And of course, any additional comments, which sometimes landlords, they might tell you a lot here in this section that you didn't even ask. So it doesn't hurt to ask them for any comments they might have. All right, I'm going to take a brief pause and look at the questions that we have here. All right. So Stacy, income to rent ratio off gross or net income? It just depends on what you personally use. I think net income makes more sense just because it is literally the dollars that they're going to have in their pocket, in their bank account. That is the money that, they have on hand. Gross sort of can help, right? Because it gives you an idea of how much money they might be taking home. But I think net would be more accurate. If you do use net, obviously that's going to be lower. So you may want to consider lowering your rent to income ratio if you're using net a little bit, just to balance that out. But really you could use either one. Okay, let's see here. All right. Do you have a release for the employer on your website, Rain? Yes, we do. So the release is actually built into the rental application, which everybody on this call is going to be getting after this webinar tomorrow. I'll send you that release, which is technically, we call it a rental application, right? It's part of it. Celia here asking the same thing about rent to income. You can use gross or net. That's fine. All right. And Alan, would a landlord with a bad tenant actually tell you that the tenant is bad? Because wouldn't the landlord want to get rid of the tenant? Sure, that certainly could happen, of course. I still think it's worth asking. Some landlords, they may want to give you the heads up, and it just because they've had a problem with the tenant doesn't necessarily mean that they want to get rid of them. I mean, they probably already did get rid of them. Maybe they got evicted at some point, or they're going to get evicted. I still think it's worth having the conversation just in case you can get more information. Hal asked the same question about whether or not they would tell you the truth. Yes, I agree. They may not, but again, definitely worth asking. Okay. Yeah, lots of questions about landlords lying. Okay, and income does include Social Security benefits. And what do you ask to verify? What is an acceptable ID? Donna, this is a great question. So yes, income can include Social Security benefits if you're in California or Chicago, Illinois. There are a couple other cities as well. I can't think of off the top of my head, but you would actually be legally required in those places to consider Social Security benefits. And to verify that, you can actually go through the Social Security Administration or have a letter or look for a direct deposit sometimes in their bank account that might show that. And that could be used to verify it. Now, if you're outside, like I mentioned, outside of those states or cities that do require you to consider that as income, it may still, be a good idea to consider it because technically, it can help them pay the rent. And then what is an acceptable ID? So an acceptable ID doesn't have to be a driver's license. It could be a passport. It could be, a state ID, for example. So you can actually, have different types of ID. I know in California as well, you can't require that the person show you a Social Security number card. You can ask for it, but if they don't have a social, you can't deny them solely because of that. So you can ask for the IDs, but you can't require the social in California specifically, and I believe New York as well. But for the most part, it's any sort of government issued ID. All right. When you say disclose your criteria, can you please provide a few examples? All right, so we'll show that in just a moment. So let's get back to the presentation here on best practices. A couple more things to cover. One of the main scams is hiding an occupant with a sketchy past. So, you screen the person, they seem great. They don't tell you that somebody else is going to move in who maybe has a criminal record or evictions or bad credit, and they move into the unit and they cause a lot of problems, but they're not listed on the lease. That is a very common scam. So one of the best ways to do it is to really try to meet all the occupants in person or on a video call. Verify, even after they move in. Maybe try to see, are there more cars than there should be parked out front? If you have parking permits, does that make sense? You know what I mean? If you're seeing sort of suspicion there, make sure that you tell them that you're going to run a credit and background check on every occupant, even a spouse or a co-signer. So a lot of landlords, for some reason, they'll only screen like the husband or the wife. They are two completely different people. They could have completely different criminal histories and credit reports, especially if maybe, one of them has really bad credit, then the other one might be the one who tries to apply and hide that the other person had bad credit. So just make sure that you are screening both individuals. And sometimes the credit reports will be kind of similar, but, in case that it's not, you'd want to know that, right? Scam number 6 is never paying the deposit after move-in. So of course, after you do have the person who's applied, you've screened them, you're ready to get them to move in, but they're like, oh, I don't have the full security deposit, or, I'll pay it for you next week. That's not okay, right? You have to have that security deposit in full before they move in. Now, I will say that there are a couple of areas where they are now enacting something called renter's choice bills that allows tenants in some areas to pay their deposit in monthly payments. But of course, whatever you can do to incentivize them to pay the whole thing, if you are in one of those cities, is absolutely the best move. If you have to discount it or something, it's better to have more in hand now than it is to have them pay it over the course of 6 months, right? All right, what else do you need to check? So we mentioned that bankruptcies are on a credit report, but tax liens and civil judgments are not. Civil judgments would include evictions, but also you may take a tenant to court for excessive damages, right? That is a civil judgment. That's not an eviction. These things are not on a credit report. We actually have a report that you can add on to your tenant screening. It's in the add-on section after you select one of the main packages. If you're with Tenant Alert, you would need to call Tenant Alert to have it added to your account, but they have it as an option. And it's very inexpensive. I think it's like $5 for you to add it on. And it's definitely worth it to see if this is on their record. Also, of course, you want to order an eviction and criminal report. So someone asked earlier, how do we find out about evictions? So an eviction report now isn't part of the credit report, so it doesn't affect their score, but you can actually search for public records for evictions and criminal. We do a search at AAOA that uses the person's social and previous addresses so that it's very accurate. In fact, we really pride ourselves in having one of the most accurate eviction reports in the industry. So that's absolutely something that you should order with every report. And most of our packages include an eviction search. So just make sure you're looking at that. And if they have lived in more than one state, make sure you're getting a nationwide eviction search. Same thing with criminal, of course. And then also, again, we just went over how to check references. If you felt like, oh my gosh, this is just too much, or I have 10 applicants or 20 applicants, I can't possibly call 20 employers and check all this, we could do it for you. So that's also an add-on product as well. But either way, whether we do it or you do it, it's a phone call and we ask those questions that I showed you. So we could save you some time on that if you want. And also, as we saw, verifying income in multiple ways is definitely the way to go. It's easy to fake a paycheck stub, but it is much harder to fake also a bank statement and a reference and a W-2 and an ID, so it really, the more you ask for, the harder it gets for them to really go through the effort. And it really shows that you're serious as well on really verifying everything. All right, setting criteria. So I'm so glad that a couple of you have already asked about this because criteria is important, I think, so that you are consistently looking at tenants in a very, consistent way, right? So we're not discriminating. We are just not going based off our emotion or our gut feeling so much. You want to find a tenant who will pay rent on time every time. So I think something you should always require is that you're able to verify the income. If you can't verify the income, I would definitely just make that a requirement. 2, set the debt to rent to income ratios. We talked about that earlier, right? Whether it's 3 or 2.5 or 2, whether you include the debt or you use gross or net, that is really up to you. I can't tell you what to do. I could just give you the idea. You can kind of see how it sits with you and decide. Collections. Maybe you have a rule that there are no rent related or utility collections, right? Because that directly relates to housing. Or you might say there can be collections, but just not within the last, 3 years, 4 years. So you just want to make sure whatever you set there, you set a parameter, you stick to it, right? What would you feel comfortable with if you saw somebody who had a collection maybe 5 years ago because they couldn't pay a utility bill? And how would you feel about that, right? So you just kind of take yourself through these scenarios and create some criteria that makes sense for you and what you're comfortable with. Credit score, we know, is the most common criteria, and it's still okay to use a credit score to judge a tenant. I don't want you to think just because there's so many other things you have to look at that the credit score doesn't matter. It does matter, but maybe not as much as all the other things put together, right? So don't just look at a credit score, but you can certainly have a range. Usually landlords feel comfortable with like a 600 or higher, 650, 700 for more luxury rentals. And of course, we did talk about different score models, right? So some score models, they're usually all in the same range, right? Where 800 or 850 is the top one. So it depends also on the score model. I would say if you use the same score model and the same report every time, you'll start to get a feel for what is acceptable as well. So usually you'll see the ranges on the score is like yellow, orange, red, and then green, of course, is always great to see. So you can set those parameters. And evictions. So, a lot of people are probably going to unfortunately be evicted in the coming year. What are your exceptions to that? Or are you not going to have any exceptions? If it's an eviction within, 5 years, is that okay? But if it happened last year, is that not okay? So you want to also look at evictions as well as part of your criteria. Bankruptcies as well, we looked at. Does it matter if it's chapter 7 or chapter 13, how long ago it happened? That is something else you could have. I know a lot of landlords have a pretty strict policy on that of no bankruptcies, but like I said, if you do see some sort of improvement, maybe there's a way you could work that into your criteria. All right, so let's say they don't meet your criteria. Just make sure you apply it to all your tenants. If they don't meet your criteria, serve an adverse action letter or declination letter. That's included in your tenant screening report. Whether you're calling in from AAOA or Tenant Alert, it is part of the report. If you can't find it, call us. We'll help you find it. That is the most just neutral way to decline a tenant. It tells them their rights and it's very simple to hand it to them. I think that's the best way to go, and avoid blanket criminal record criteria. So, rather than saying no felons at all, that is a little bit questionable now with HUD's new guidelines. So just try to analyze each person with a criminal record individually. Also, note that tenants do have the right to request their report from the tenant screening provider, which would be us or Tenant Alert, within 60 days, and they can dispute it. So that declination letter tells them about this. So that's just, FYI for you. And lastly, let's talk about non-traditional applicants. So you might be thinking, what if the person I'm screening doesn't have credit? What if they don't have a social? What if they don't have, a previous employer? So what do we do? So one is, if they have an ITIN number, which is an individual taxpayer identification number, you can still get a credit report on them. Now, whether or not there will be anything on the credit report depends, right? Did they open up any lines of credit? Usually people with an ITIN are fairly new to the country, so they may or may not have credit, but it's certainly worth checking, right? So you can check it if they have an ITIN. If they don't have either one, you cannot check the credit report. If they don't have any credit history, though, the good news is they don't have debt, right? Which we saw is one of the factors you should be considering. So if that's zero, I mean, that's pretty good, right? At least they're not going to have any monthly obligations as far as loans or credit cards. And also ask for a US cosigner with a credit history if they don't have credit or if they're not from this country. That could be an alternative. So you have somebody who can vouch for them. And you could also ask for more references. Maybe this might involve personal references or more employers or more landlords, maybe not just the previous one, but the one before that. The more references you have, the more comfortable you can feel. I know some of you said people do lie about, their previous tenants and whatnot, but it's still worth asking, I think. And again, the more you ask for, the less likely or the harder it is for the tenant to really lie. So that helps. And also, if you do have an international applicant who's literally never lived here and they're coming from another country, we could actually do an international background check. That's going to vary pretty widely depending on where they're from, and it might take a long time. Usually, I would say Canada is like the easiest one. It's a few days, $50, but it does depend on the country, where it could be, 2 weeks to get a background check. So just be aware of that, but it's not, it's worth a call to us to find out if we can help you with it. And you can require a lease guarantee, which is actually a way for you to guarantee the lease. I was going to talk about that a little bit more, but it looks like we're out of time. I've actually gone over, and I do want to answer some of your questions. So I'll go ahead and answer some of the questions first, and then we'll circle back and see where we land. We do have 42 questions, so I don't know that I'll get through all of them probably, but if I don't, I will be sure to email you after the webinar separately, individually, so that I can answer your question that way. So don't worry if I don't get to it on this particular webinar. All right, so let's see here. Okay, Alan says a person that has no credit cards or debt will have a low credit score. Actually, Alan, they will have no credit score. So if you don't have any credit cards or any debt, typically there will be no score. Now, TransUnion recently changed that slightly, where they have allowed, I think, some sort of indicator, but it is, if you're using like Experian or Equifax, FICO, for example, you're not going to get any score at all on the person. It's just going to say NA on it, not available. So that's typical. And then even if you did see a low credit score, I mean, what does that really mean, right? If they have no debt, they have no credit cards, what are they basing it on? So I would say someone with no debt is less risky than someone with high debt and a better credit score. All right. Does the international background check include Interpol records from Ray? Yes, it would. And you would get, that's part of the criminal part of the international background check. All right. As a landlord, can you report non-rental payments to the credit bureau? So remember at the beginning of the presentation, I did mention that you could actually get rental payments reported now on the credit report, which is something that, wasn't available before. And recently, a few companies have worked things out with the credit bureaus to allow mom and pop landlords to do it. Spurlonga data is one that we've worked with. So you can report them, but it's still pretty new. So you're likely not going to see it on the credit report yet. All right. Please tell us some of the benefits and fees for joining your organization, from Jeff. Well, I'm glad you asked, Jeff. It's completely free to sign up for our association. It is a free membership. You can also pay for membership if you want discounts and other benefits, but you would just go to aaoa.com and click the Join Now button on the upper right. And some of the benefits are webinars like these, state-specific landlord forms. I'll send you a couple of our general forms after this call. You also get our newsletter every week. You'll get our magazine. So you get a lot of industry knowledge that I think is important for us to have as landlords. Okay, how would you evaluate criteria for nonprofits leasing a commercial unit for an office, which may use the unit overnight as a dwelling? Ooh, Al, that is very complex. So they're not only using it for business, but they're also living there. I would talk to an attorney on that one, because even writing up a lease for that, where it's, dual usage, might be a little tricky and unique. And I think worth, depending on where it is, definitely worth having a lawyer look into it. So I'm going to leave that one for your lawyer. If you need a lawyer, let me know, because we have some great ones we could refer you to. And that's another perk of the membership benefits. All right, if we want to report tenants who have non-payment, which number should I call? So to report that, I would say you could use either Spurlonga data. So I'll type that in the chat for you. And that would be to report any payments moving forward. If you have non-payment now, you could also go to Rent Recovery Service. It's a nationwide collection agency that we're partnered with. So that one might be good as well. They would just put it on the person's credit report. I think it's like $25 or something like that. So it's definitely worth putting it on there. Al, I will connect you with the lawyer after the call, if that's the case. All right. Donna, do they have a right for a copy of their criminal report? Yes, if you decline them. So if you decline them for the rental, they are allowed to ask for a copy of their report, and that would include criminal. And in California, it is, yeah, in California, it's like an automatic thing, but I think in other states they have to ask for it. Either way, we would process it for them. So you aren't in the equation. They can just call us directly if they want a copy, and we can provide it to them at no cost. All right. With no judgments on the credit report, how do we find that? So as I mentioned, Russell, there is an add-on in aaoa.com when you are ordering a screening report to add it for, I think, $5 for statewide, $10 for nationwide. Now, if you're with Tenant Alert, Russell, please give us a call. Actually, I'm going to put Tenant Alert's phone number in here in case you guys need it. Sorry. All right, so I'm going to do Tenant Alert here. So that's going to be the number you're going to call there to get that set up in your account if you need it. Russell says, we used to deny people who owed a past landlord or utility. That's a great criteria as well. If you feel like that's a huge red flag, which I think it is, then yeah, that could be something you could say on your criteria. No collections to a utility bill company of any kind or landlord. We commonly see like T-Mobile or AT&T on the credit reports when they stop paying their utility, or DirecTV, whatever they're using. Okay. Can we verify income and credit for a current tenant who has been living there for 3 years? So Sam, unless you have a lease renewal and it's part of your lease that you do require an annual verification, or you have an addendum to the lease, no, you can't randomly screen your current tenant. You have to do that before they move in. And if, like I said, if they do live there already and you want to make it so that you have to screen them every year, you can, but they have to agree to that. And they also have to release their report to you, even if they've already been living there. So they have to be aware that you're doing it as well. Okay. Let's see. All right, how can I find out if the tenant left owing money to a past landlord, i.e. damages or unpaid rent? So really, you have to ask the previous landlord. I know they might not tell you the truth, but that's one way. The other way as well would be to find out if they maybe had a civil judgment out against the person. With that civil judgments report, it may be recorded, but if the landlord didn't take them to court, they never used a collection agency, and they didn't report it anywhere, it's next to impossible to know. That's why it's so important, I think, as landlords to really report what's happening, because it helps future landlords, right? So unfortunately, if there's no paper trail and the landlord won't tell you, there's really no way to know. All right. Do you suggest checking the previous landlord and the current landlord? Certainly, yes. If you can get both landlords, I would say a 5-year range is good. So, you know, how many landlords they've had in 5 years, maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3, I don't know. You may want to ask for all of those references that you can get. And a previous landlord, not current landlord, is more likely to tell you the truth, because they don't have as much to gain from the tenant moving. All right. When tenants have a lower credit score, I'm asking for a higher security deposit, usually 25% more. What do you think? Well, I think that that's a great idea. Certainly, if you do have exceptions to your criteria, the exceptions themselves should be standardized. So I like that you said you had a very specific percentage amount. So perhaps as part of your criteria, you could include, okay, if you don't meet the following criteria, then you would pay, 25% more of the security deposit. Or if you don't meet the 600 or 650 credit score, you have to pay more security deposit. That is certainly something that you could do. The other thing as well is lease guarantee, which I know I didn't finish going over here, but I will go over it in just a moment, because I do think it's still important here. So let me go ahead and pull this up. All right. So lease guarantee is something that can be added with any tenant screening report that's ordered on AAOA or Tenant Alert. And essentially it reimburses you for court judgments up to $10,000. So if you did take a tenant to court, usually they're not going to pay you. So lease guarantee would step in and just pay you that amount within 30 days, which is really nice to have. I'm going to skip over some of these things here real quick. Because I want to answer this question. Something you could do is ask the tenant to pay for lease guarantee as part of your requirement if they don't meet your criteria. So if you ask the tenant to pay for it, essentially it gives you protection in case they stop paying rent and you have to take them to court. And a lot of tenants, they will pay it because they know they won't qualify for the rental otherwise. And if you ask them to pay for the highest level of protection, you would get up to $10,000 if you had to take them to court. So that's something I would consider building into your criteria as well, is just having a lease guarantee component. You could ask for it in addition to a security deposit and or instead of a co-signer. So that's a great way to add maybe a little more opportunity for people to qualify. And you do get not only the security deposit to back you up in case you need it right away, but then if you do take the tenant to court, you have $10,000 there waiting for you. So it really eliminates a lot of the risk involved. These are the prices here on the right. Again, when you screen a tenant on AAOA or Tenant Alert, it is automatically included if you are ordering a credit report. So it's going to tell you this person qualifies for lease guarantee, ask them to pay for it, or you can pay for it yourself if you prefer. So that's something that, again, I would suggest if you don't necessarily want to turn someone away, you want to make an exception, but you want to do it in a smart way. All right, so let's see here, some more questions. Elsie is asking if you have to get lease guarantee at the onset of tenancy. You do. It has to be paid for before the lease is signed, so just keep that in mind. Also, states do, Miranda says, what about states that limit security deposits? That's fine. So you want to still stay within the security deposit limit, but lease guarantee is not a security deposit. It is technically a type of protection. It's a contract outside of that. So it's a fee really for the tenant. So you can require it. It doesn't really count towards the security deposit limit. If you're unsure, of course, I always suggest you want to talk to your attorney and verify that. You certainly can, but we've had members that do use both and they've been okay. What is the difference between AAOA and Tenant Alert from Jeff? So Tenant Alert is a tenant screening company. AAOA, we use Tenant Alert's reports. So that is the difference. AAOA is a completely separate company though. Apologies about my my dog. Okay, and how can you get tenant pay for the credit score check instead of landlord pay on AAOA.com? So actually, you can have the tenant pay for the report if you order a blue package or a gold package on AAOA's website. It is included as an option. Or if you do pay for membership on AAOA, the tenant can pay for any of the reports. You would just indicate that when you go to purchase it. Teresa, does a landlord require approval, or is a landlord required to get approval from tenants to use Spurlonga data to report rental payments in New York State? No, you do not need to get approval from them, but we do suggest that you tell them because it can motivate them to pay rent on time more frequently. So I think it's actually a good thing to tell them. Can landlords just ask the tenant for proof of rental payments, cancel checks or bank statements? Joanna, of course, yes. And I think that's a great way to see the rental payments history. Although, sometimes they may pay rent a little differently. So if they pay cash, that might not be something that you'd be able to see. But most people don't pay cash anymore. But I think you should be able to get a paper trail in most cases. You're welcome, Teresa. All right. Let's see here. I'm going back a little bit to see if I missed anything. All right. You guys have some great questions today. I'm really liking these. Let's see. Rich, slightly off topic. Do you have any recommendations for which sources to use in determining an appropriate rental price? So actually I do. Rentometer is really great if you want to see, what sort of market rent you should be charging your tenants. Absolutely. They're going to give you some comps. You can pay for their membership and they'll do a more detailed sort of report for you. And I think it's definitely worth it because if you price your rentals correctly, you're going to be getting the right type of tenants to apply. If you price it too low, you're going to be weeding through a lot of tenants and losing out on some potential revenue. So I would say Rentometer, again, it's I'll put it in the chat actually for you guys to check out. That's a great resource to use. I like the reports. All right. Yeah, Greg says, since when do HR departments reveal employee incomes? To my knowledge, California does not require employers to release this information. It's true. No company is required to release it, but a lot of them do. And some of them use the work number, which is a third party that's ran by Experian, a third party company. And they'll often have it there, but it's up to the individual company. So there's no law against it. There's no, I mean, it's just up to the company. And some of them don't reveal it, and that's okay. Again, what we want to see at least is verification that they work there and their job title and whatnot. So that alone could be very valuable for you. And some of them will release it as long as you give them a copy of the rental application. And of course, when you give them the rental application, you can cross out like the social security number and date of birth and stuff. Okay. Let's see, Suzanne, what can you do for a tenant that has caused more damage than a security deposit other than claims? So yeah, small claims would be really the way to go with the damages. I mean, that's really the way to get it reported and to be able to collect on that. That is the best way to do it. And small claims now, at least for rental related things, I mean, it's going to be a little tough in terms of timing. There's a lot of backlog, but it's certainly worth trying, I think, to get that on there. All right, Arthur, how do you handle service animals? Everyone says they're certified. Can you charge additional security? Fortunately, you cannot. We did a whole webinar on this last month, and I'll be happy to share that with you, Arthur. It's all about, service animals and emotional support animals and how to handle them. Essentially, you can't charge extra security deposit or a fee for those animals if they are emotional support. And there are ways that you can verify that as well. And that webinar goes over how to verify that it's legitimate. Okay. Okay, Craig, if you use a realtor and they use your application and run an Experian report and score, what other reports would you suggest? So yes, back to that slide, I had the public records report. So bankruptcies, tax liens, and judgments report, telecheck to see if they've written any bad checks. Usually, I don't know if Experian will include criminal and evictions. They might have a package, but if they don't, obviously you want to do the criminal and eviction search as well. On AAOA.com, we have something called a basic background. You could do that one. It doesn't include a credit report, and then you can add on more background information, but it does have a eviction and criminal report. Donna, I've heard running a background check can be a bit touchy-feely in California. Your thoughts? So far in California, Oakland is the only city that has banned the use of criminal records. We automatically, and Tenant Alert does too, filters out any records you shouldn't be seeing according to state policy. So yeah, there are some trends towards not having background check information available to landlords, which is crazy. And I know Seattle has passed something like that. New York is trying really hard to pass that as well right now. And it certainly could happen, but we will be sure to filter that information or let you know if it's not available in your area. And, there are still a lot of other places where people could commit crimes and that can be reported. So it's still worth doing the background check and finding out if they have anything there. And again, the background check too, it goes back 7 years. So it's not indefinite. That is part of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is federal. So right now you're getting 7 years convictions of misdemeanors and felonies, sex offense, terrorist and federal crimes in our reports. Yeah, James, is it legal to adjust the security deposit to offset possible negatives you might find on the credit report? So I sort of answered this earlier. Yes, you can adjust it, but it has to be consistent. So no matter what you do, you need to make it the same for everyone. So that is really the key here, is being consistent so that you're not discriminating against any particular person or making exceptions or favors for certain people. Will divorce and child support payments be included in one of these? So sometimes it's on a credit report. We see it as a line of credit, which is very strange to me. I don't know why the credit bureaus include it as a line of credit. It's kind of odd, but usually you'll see it there. Unfortunately, though, we don't have a report yet that would tell you for sure how much they have to pay or how much they are receiving. There is no central database that I know of that would provide that, but the credit bureau usually will have something on the report that will indicate how much they have to pay to, let's say, the mother of their child or something. All right. Okay, if the tenant has a criminal report and you tell them you're not qualified and the tenant asks, oh, so if the tenant has a criminal record, I think is what you meant, and they're not qualified and the tenant asks for a reason, should I tell them why, or should they ask for a copy of the report? Should the landlord provide them? So the declination letter that comes with all the reports will do a lot of the talking for you. And in there, it says that they can contact us for a copy of the report. And if they have a dispute, the dispute goes through us or Tenant Alert. So you would really just be giving them the information so that they can find out and get a copy of their report. And then they would be the ones to sort of dispute it if they see something that's inaccurate on the report. All right, let's see here. Ron, some employers are now hiring an employee verification third company, and these third parties want to charge you an excessive amount of money. What do you suggest? So Ron, I suggest you just pay it because it is very, very, very important to know how much money your tenant is actually making. If you do get it through us, if you order the employment verification through us, because that is an add-on, Tenant Alert has the option as well if you call them and want it added to your account. It's $15, and the third party, usually it's the same one. It's the biggest one there is. They're called the work number. We get a discounted rate. So we would charge you the discounted fee, and it's still probably going to be less than what you would pay if you go directly to them. So I would suggest using our verification service, and it will actually probably be less than what you would pay, but it's still going to be extra. And unfortunately, more and more companies are using them to verify those kind of things. So it sort of depends on the size of the company. All right. Looking through some of these, I think I've answered quite a few of them, and I don't see many that I haven't answered. There's a couple that are a little long and specific, so I think I'm going to probably get back to you all on those separately. And let me look at the chat because I know that's kind of been going crazy. I know I haven't really been able to look at the chat so far, but Jerry's saying here, ask for a statement from the Department of Child Support Services to see if they're actually collecting the support. That's a great idea, Jerry. For all of these sort of programs or services, there are departments that can give you letters or proof or some sort of verification of those funds that are coming to the person. All right, I'm glad you guys thought this webinar was thorough. Hopefully not too much information, but I tried to get through as much as I could. Okay, let's see here. Can we ask a tenant to pay for a credit, criminal, or eviction check? Is this part of the application fee? Yes, it is usually considered part of it. Now, there are some states where they allow you to charge for your time. New York no longer allows that. It's $20 no matter what. So it's all in there, whether the report costs more or you took a lot of time, it doesn't matter. New York is very strict on that $20 rule. So you're out of luck. You got to just charge $20 and the rest is going to come out of your pocket. Again, you want to contact tenantalert.com. If you're in New York, we can set up a special New York package for you that is discounted because we understand obviously that, and we can do it on AAA too, that it's just a little bit, difficult now with that new law to get all the information you need at a reasonable price. Okay, does your screening apply to Puerto Rico? It does, yes. all the entire US and all of the territories. So you're good on that. That's not considered international. But if there is somewhere outside of the states, we can get that information for you. Yes, Johnny says, Mary, I'd be curious to know that as well. Our attorney says that we can't cherry pick applicants. The first applicant who meets the minimum criteria gets it. So that's one of the suggestions that I had at the beginning of the presentation. It's the easiest way to stay out of trouble. It's just no matter what state you're in, if you have one applicant who applied on Monday and you have another one who applied on Friday, but you liked, and they both qualify for your criteria, right? They all have the best credit score and income and all that, but you sort of like the personality of the person who applied on Friday. Let's say they have the exact same report, but you like one better than the other personally. That's a problem because it is difficult to show why you would have picked the person who applied 5 days later when you had a perfect applicant on Monday, right? Oh, was it the color of their skin? Was it their religion? Was it their sexual orientation? So there's different reasons people could come up with why you would have picked one person over the other. And so it's safer to just go based on when they applied and first qualified, first applied, and then it's super neutral. Now, that's not a law in every state or anything like that. But again, it's just a suggestion. And Johnny, your lawyer's telling you that. He's in California. California is a tricky state. So if your lawyer's telling you that, go with it. I would say he's probably telling you that for a good reason because it does keep you out of trouble. All right. Should you and can you verify income with each renewal for the same tenants? You certainly could. I don't know. Ask your attorney if there's anything against that. I've never heard of anything against that, but I'm pretty sure if you have it in the lease, they agree to it. You can screen them every year, make sure that they still qualify for it. In California, though, and New York, it is a little different, or places with rent control, just because you do have the obligation to offer them the rental and the renewal. So if you are in California, I would just say talk to your attorney about that. But in a lot of other states, you can rescreen tenants at the lease renewal. Mary is asking, oh, that was the same question referenced earlier. Okay, how long does it take for the eviction to appear on the report, Janet? It depends on the court, unfortunately. So some courts are more slow than others, and it just depends on their backlog. So, I mean, it could be even a couple months to see it on the report. David, can you sue a landlord for giving you false information regarding a tenant? Not that I'm aware of, but if you want to ask your attorney, you certainly could. Mary asking how many months of bank statements should we ask for? I would say 60 days is pretty reasonable. There's really no law as to like a limit, but at a certain point it gets unreasonable and the tenant might be like, why are you asking me for, a year's worth of bank statements? So I would say 30 or 60, 90 days, that's going to give you a good sense. You don't need really more than that. Fulgencio, what would be the best criteria when looking at a credit report? Any key insights on identifying an integrous character? You could see whether or not they've paid their bills on time, right? So I would want to see, looking at just green, they've always paid, they pay down their debt. So they have almost no debt and no balances, and they're just paying everything consistently. That would be the ideal situation. And usually if that's the case and they've had history for a long time, so let's say they've had a credit report for, I don't know, 20 years, and they've never missed a payment, that would say a lot about their character, right? That's what a credit report is really trying to show you. But there are also a bunch of other things you should look at too to qualify them. But I would say that is usually what you're hoping to see on a credit report of a good tenant. All right. So a lot of you are heading out, and I don't blame you because we are 30 minutes over on the presentation here, but I'm so glad that you stuck with me because I hope that you learned something new. I tried to cover as much as possible, and answer as many questions as I could. I'll be in touch with all of you individually. If I didn't get to your question, especially, I'll be prioritizing those. And of course, the recording is going to be sent to you tomorrow, as well as all of the resources that I talked about. I'll make a long list of all the things that you need that I think are important, previous webinars, forms, that kind of thing. Some of the resources that we have at AAOA are free. I said earlier, you can join the association for free. If you just go to aaoa.com, I'm going to put it in the chat here. You can just click there to click to join. And essentially, you're going to get all of these forms for free here on the left. That's the rental application, the declination letter, the questionnaire that I showed you, the addendum for lease guarantee, should you use a lease guarantee program, move in, move out checklist. So important to figure out, what the state of the rental is in and what it is when they leave, and have it documented, have the tenant sign off on that. Pet addendum, if you do allow pets, that's the best way to do it, is to have an addendum for it with some rules. And also, we have premium forms as well. So these you do have to pay for, and there's about 150 premium forms, but the most important ones are the state-specific lease agreement, obviously, and state-specific disclosures that you're supposed to give to tenants, especially if you're in states like California. These are really great forms to have, and it's just $50 a year, or if you do become a member with AAOA and you pay for membership, which is optional, it's included. So I would suggest checking out aaoa.com, go to the join button, and just see, at least join for free, because you can get a bunch of free stuff. And then if you see that you need to upgrade to get some more discounts or features, you certainly could. So I am available to talk to you if you need me. My email is alexandra@aaoa.com. I don't hide my email from anyone, so if you want to email me, I will respond. So don't be shy if you have questions or if you have anything you'd like to tell me. Also, please take the exit survey as you are leaving. I would love to hear your thoughts on this presentation, and you just get to know a little bit more about you. So please answer that as you head out. And with that being said, I will go ahead and end the presentation here. This is our last webinar of the year, but we'll be back January 11th. And that will be about how to increase your rent revenue in 2022. I'm very excited to host that. So I'll be in touch next month with an invitation for that. In the meantime, happy holidays. I hope you have a great new year as well. Take care, everyone. Bye.